Um, today. He moved here a few months ago. And I've heard a little bit of his story and yeah, it's kind of interesting coming into the program. I yeah, nobody told me that I had family members in this thing. Which is kind of funny. I didn't find out until I was a few years into recovery. And it's been kind of cool catching up with him a little bit. We still gotta get dinner, get coffee, life gets busy. That's what happens when you're in this for a little bit. Your time kind of dwindles, and I think that's a good thing. The more time I'm spending on my own shit, doing my own things, the less I'm being there for others. Um, so yeah, that's a gift that's been in it, and it's a gift to see my relative in here, and yeah, excited to hear his story. So here's Earl.
Set my timer because I can have a tendency to get long-winded. 40 minutes, is that about right? Okay. All right. Done this since June. Go ahead. Stanley, the foreman, he said the standard, what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. I was born on a Blackfeet Indian reservation. I was raised half in the mountains and half in town. My dad was a logger cowboy, built houses on occasion. My mother was a nurse for the Indian Health Service hospital. Um, like Stan said, I'm his uncle, and his dad is my big brother. I got four big brothers. I got two older sisters, and I got one younger sister. I always looked up to Stan's dad because he's kind of my protector when I was a kid. Um, but alcoholism runs deep in our veins. I was telling Stan we lost a ton of family. I was thinking last night, I kind of first actual one in that I was 18 was I lost my uncle in '99, and it was renal failure due to alcoholism. Uh, Prior to that, I lost my uncle Vernon, cirrhosis. I lost an ambulance to cirrhosis. I lost my uncle Vic to a jumping car wreck. I lost my uncle Jim to he had been a wino his whole life, and he sobered up 2 weeks after that. He had a massive heart attack. I lost my grandpa. He drank himself to death. And that's just on my paternal side. And here in the last few years, I lost two older brothers. My oldest brother Pete, he died of just basically drinking himself to death. And other complications of diabetes and other stuff. And then I lost my brother Mike. We called him Moose. I lost my wonderful brothers, and we lost him to pills. I recently lost my niece a few years ago. My niece Kathleen. We lost her to intravenous drug use. I lost my aunt about 4 years ago. We lost her to drinking and meth use. So this stuff runs deep in my veins. It's been running deep in my veins probably because my family been dying probably since about the 40s up until today. I still got family members. I don't know what's keeping them alive. For some reason, and I'll never understand it, but I was spared. For a lot of years, as I watched families die, I watched my nieces and nephews try to drink themselves to death and drug themselves to death. Watched my family drop off like flies. I kind of had survivor guilt, and I kind of in the most recent years, that finally went away. You know, I just came to the conclusion that for some reason, creator picked me to get this stuff. And I just didn't get this stuff. I got it early in life. Um, for me, my drinking was thinking about it as I was driving over. I I think if I drink with any one of you guys, probably run from me because I'm a big guy and I can get scary even if I don't want to. But if I need to, I can definitely get scary. Um, and I used to drink just from day one. I blacked out. My first blackout, you know, I still, some people talk about hard drugs, heroin, meth, whatever, the very first use, they could remember and how good it felt. And I can think back at 16 years old, the first time I ever blacked out. I either started out just one night. We ended up at my aunt's house where we always ended up. And next thing I knew, I was in the back of my uncle's pickup being dropped off at my mother's house. But the blackout, it was like, well, actually, I don't remember that part. I remember waking up. And to be honest, I messed myself. Well, I was new, but goddamn, I felt good. Well, that's kind of an oxymoron. But I felt like the whole world had been lifted off my shoulders. You know, and I can't kind of describe it because I felt fucking great. Um, and then after that, I didn't just jump into alcoholism, but every time the chance came up, of course, I drank. And every time I blacked out, you know, sometimes I thought to myself, sometimes I think to myself, well, if I didn't black out, I wonder if I'd still be there. Yeah, I might still be there. But I literally, every time I drank, I blacked out, you know, and as I got older, progressively older, it just got worse, worse, worse. So it came to a point where I was just drinking straight whiskey. I pretty much take anything that anybody offered, I put in my body. And it got to a point where I was blacking out for like weeks at a time, just kind of wandering the reservation, you know. And then I don't know if anybody else here has been raised on a reservation, but it's a dangerous place, kind of a scary place. It's a beautiful place, don't get me wrong. I'm very proud of who I am and where I come from. But it can be a very scary place too, filled with violence, drugs, alcoholism. And that's the part of the red I got into, dealt into at a young age. And I would wake up sometimes. I remember one time I woke up from a blackout. I'd been on a runner for about a week. And I was at my sister's house. I was sleeping on the couch. And I woke up and my nephew and my three nieces were standing there. They're just little kids. And they were looking at me. And I was like, morning. What's up? He said, Uncle, what happened to you? I was like, what do you mean what happened to me? Your face. I had blood crumbles all over me. I was blessed with a thick skull. I didn't bruise that easy. But they could tell I'd been beat up. And the sad part of that story is I could not tell you to this day who beat that right. You know? And I pride myself on being a fighter, a tough guy, and all this, and you know, that was pretty humiliating. And I just got progressively worse. I got stabbed. I couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag when I'm in a blackout. Being a big guy, a lot of guys wanted to, I don't know, up their reputation. So a lot of them would come after me, big fights, and I just wouldn't know, you know. And I think it kind of, I almost said the word, um, like culminated to, but no matter how worse it got, it can always get worse for me, you know. And I remember one time I woke up, we got a place called the Pavilion outside of Browning, and it's just south of town. And I woke up out there, and it was probably about this time of year. And I I remember I woke up and I was laying on the ground. And I usually sleep on my side, so I sleep on my back. And I really didn't know. And I remember I just felt, oh, I don't know who's ever been in a couple scraps here, but when you get up and coming out of it, you can feel the soreness in your face. And even before I woke up, I was, oh man, good captain. I was feeling my face, and I kind of felt, and I was on the ground. And I finally sat up. And I thought, holy shit, I'm cool. And I started to look around, and where am I? And I had one shoe on. And I was like, holy shit, what happened? And I sat up, and I kind of looked to the north, and I could see lights, like the town lights. And then I started to click, and I saw the railroad track, and I saw the big yellow pavilion building, and I was like, holy fuck, it's cool, what happened? And then it clicked. And I said, "Is that the pavilion?" Yes, sir enough, it was. So I knew which way to go, and I walked to town. Those kind of mornings were pretty normal for me. Um, and I walked to town, and I went to this place called the Legion. And I walked in the Legion, and I ran into my friend, little Earl Wolfers. And he said, how you doing, man? That's good. And he said, how'd you look, Earl? And I said, I look, bro. He bought me a drink. We drank a few, and I said, hey, could you give me a ride home? He said, yeah. And most normal people would like say, I'm gonna go to treatment, I'm gonna sober up, I'm gonna do normal things. Not me. I went cleaned up and headed right back to the Legion. And it was just like that over and over and over again. And I finally went to carpentry school in Helena, Montana. And when I went to carpentry school, my mother was Stan said there's a few of us. Me, my mother and Stan are all in the program. And my mother sobered up way back in like 83, 84. And she was always she didn't freeze, but she would just always kind of put a bug in my ear. Always put a bug in my ear. So when I went down there, she was just graduating Carroll College. And I stayed sober for a while. And I finished carpentry school. I met a lady down there. We started living together, and and then started drinking again. You know, and it's really different drinking in the white man world than it is the Indian world. I always told people the Indian world's like Vegas. What happens there stays there. The white man world, there's like major consequences. And I hated that. But I started bouncing in the bar. I started drinking again. Progressively started DUI. Finally wrecked the car. But luckily, I was working on a pipeline just outside of Lake and Shelby when I wrecked my car. And it was on the red because I had taken some time off from Helena to go work on the pipeline. And I ended up wrecking the car. I ended up scaring the lady that I was with to death. I never hit a woman in my life. I don't believe in that, and I don't condone that. Somehow I scared her to death one night. And I said, what did I do? And we were talking, and we broke up, and I was in a window. The window was only about this big. I was in pretty good shape when I was young. And she said, you came, you wanted to talk. I said no, and you wouldn't stop. And you asked to come in. I said, she said no. And she said, I dove through the window. And I eventually made amends for it. But man, she moved out of town. So everything I knew then was gone. And then the pipeline was the last straw because on the pipeline you work 7 days or 6 days, and you drink for 6 days, and then on Sunday you double drink. And I finally had it. I just got sick of the car wrecks. I got sick of getting beat up. I got sick of the fights. I got sick of I guess one time my cousin Arch, he went on a runner for about 8 years. And he finally sobered up. That's what it is in the country. And he finally sobered up. And I've been sober. And I asked him, I said, what finally made you sober up, Birch? His real name's Sean, but I always got nicknames. He said, well, he said, fuck, I got sick of being the town fool. And I could relate with that, you know? And when I sobered up, I did. And I just happened to be sober enough in the greatest town, I think, to sober up. You know, Missoula's pretty cool, but way back then, Helena was freaking awesome. And I started going to meetings. You know, my mom was kind of pushing me. And when I sobered up, I ended up staying with my buddy Dale, good gun. And he was clean and sober. So he always tried to get me to meetings. I was like, no. And then finally I had respect for him and living in his house. I went to the meetings and I just, you know, I'd been to 2 treatment centers by that time. And I'd been tried to sober up in Alcoholics Anonymous probably 50 times. I had a home group there one time, Homeward Bound, 5:30 home group. And I'd go to a meeting and I'd get drunk. Go to a meeting, I'd get drunk. And I'd always say, you know, it's that standard question we ask, is anybody here since their first, what is it? Is this anybody's first meeting since their last drink? You know, it got so bad for me that when they'd say that, I swear to God, my whole home group would kind of go like this. And I was like, I ain't even gonna say it no more. Because I know I'm not being honest about it, you know. But I seen this guy, his name was Doc John. At that time, Doc had been sober probably about 12, 13 years. And I like what he said in the meeting. We visited a few times outside of the meeting. And he was a smart guy. And he just seemed sincere. And I really liked what he had. And that's what I wanted. And one day I just said, Doc, looking for a sponsor. So he said, yeah, where's Cyril? So I started working with Doc. It was a rocky year, maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years that I could not get it. I could not get it. And I knew I'd been cheap. I thought I knew the 12 steps. You know, and I thought, well, I did that before. But there was one thing that was all that I knew. And I knew this because my mother preached it when she sobered up. And my mother preached that you're only, oh, she didn't preach, like I said, she just always bugged in my ear. And she would always say, you're only as sick as your darkest secrets, you know? And when I sobered up, that was in the back of my head. And I knew in 2 treatment centers, in a prior sponsor, and trying to sober up, tough it out, and also trying to sober up in the program, I held things back. You know, I was never truly honest about some things. And I said, I'm going to try it different this time. You know, and Doc walked me through it. I finally said, I'm going to freaking tell everything. Tell everything, you know. And he got me through 1, 2, and 3. And then we started the 4th step. And that one just kind of blew my mind because the step is, for me, the 4th and the 5th is like the core of this whole thing. At least it was for me, you know. I always believed in Creator. You know, I never practiced it, but I always believed in Creator. And he started walking me through the 4th. And I remember, you know, today when I hear people say, I got through in about a week. You know, I'm like, what? Am I just sicker than everybody or what? And also the guys I sponsored that I walked through 4 steps with, I'm like, this guy ain't even in my neighborhood for sickness, you know? And I got really honest and I prayed for honesty. And you guys all know Mick, right? You know, hippie Mick. Well, Mick was there when I sobered up. We've been friends for about 30 years now. And I remember we went to a sweat lodge. I sobered up on October 31st, 1995. And I remember we went to a sweat lodge on November 19th, 1995. And I remember just praying to stay sober. And I remember asking for the courage to be honest in my four step, you know. And I kept looking at that life that I'd been leading, and I was like, man, I don't want to go back to that. I really don't want to go back to that. So I started doing the work with Doc, like I said. And in that four step, I got brutally honest with myself. You know, when I say brutally honest, I talked about my sexual abuse as a kid. I talked about my physical abuse as a kid. I talked about my hypersexuality as a kid. I talked about um I everything, everything. I can look everybody in the eye today and I can say this in all honesty. There's one man on this earth that knows every last thing about me. Doc John. He's an old emergency room doctor, he's retired now, and he lives in Boise, Idaho. And it took me about 5 or 6 months to write that all out because all I know is shame. Especially up to that point, all I knew was shame. And all that stuff I was supposed to take with me to my grave, but I couldn't live like I was living anymore. So then I remember it took me about 5 or 6 months. And I remember one of the best pieces of advice Doc ever gave me, because we checked in once, twice a week. And I said, Doc, there's some stuff, man. Can't tell you that. You know, he said, oh, this is what you do. That you take your, back then we had these things called pencils. You take your notebook and your pencil. And he said, you sit down and you put them next to each other, and he said, you sit there and you pray for the willingness. Pray for the willingness. And it'll come. He told me that it'll come. And that's what I did, you know. And all of that really dark, dirty, nasty stuff that was in me, started to put on paper. And I cried a lot, and I cussed a lot, and then finally we got to that part where I had to tell it to him. And I was like, oh, Jesus. You know, I'm no doctor. No. And he'd always say, if you're part of the we in the book, and he had me convinced that yes, I was part of the we in the book. And he said, well, this is what the we did. And I said, okay. Well, we started to sit down, and I'd have to really sit down and pray before I went to those, and I'd have to just beg God for the courage. And I remember just sitting across in the Helena Club in Helena, Montana, in the back room, across from me, put on a table, and I started. And it took me probably about a good 6 weeks to get through all of that. I wrote a lot. I still have my four step, my original four step, and I wrote a lot. You know, to be honest, and some days when I go back and read it, I was like, holy shit, I was brutally honest. And I started to get it out, and I was sitting there and I was like crying sometimes. I was like, couldn't look off in the face. And and I remember at the end of each time, he'd stand up, and he was an emergency room doctor that worked at night. So he was always fucking tired. And so he'd sit there like this, sitting on his chair, kind of hold his hands like this and close his eyes as he was listening. And I was like, hmm. And some of the deepest, darkest, dirty, nastiest stuff that I carried around when I would tell it to him. You know, I couldn't look at him, and sometimes I'd look up, and then I swear to God, sometimes that man fell asleep. It's like, and I was like, this is icky, nasty, dirty stuff that I've carried around until this point in my life. And this guy's like, huh. And then at the end of each time, when we have those sessions, he'd get up with a big smile, and he'd say, Earl, and he'd go like this, thank you. And he'd give me a big hug, say, thank you, Doc. Give him a big hug. And that man didn't judge me. and didn't judge me one iota. And I think that's one of the biggest things that made the difference is he didn't judge me. And we finally got through it. And I was like, everybody says, well, not everybody, a lot of people, but a lot of people say, I felt relieved, I felt lighter, I felt like the world lifted off my shoulders. I didn't feel like that. Maybe mine was more the educational variety, I guess. But what I felt was, I'm gonna have to kill this guy. It's every, it's every last thing about me. I think it. But I also felt like I just ratted myself off. But also, on the positive side, I realized I was no longer alone with my stuff, And I realized that I had a beautiful, wonderful man in front of me that I looked up to and I admired, that had zero judgment for anything. And at the end of each session, he would give me a big hug and tell me he loved me. And I'll tell you what, that made all the difference. For some reason, God blessed me with a wonderful sponsor. And I remember that. Then I thought, oh my good God, the toughest part's over. And then he taught me about 8 and 9. I was like, oh, you shit me, Doc. Really? And when we got to 8 and 9, he had me thoroughly convinced, and I thank God for it, that I was one of the we in the book. And he said, this is what we have to do, Earl. And I said, okay. And, I learned, like some people throughout the year, they'll say, hardest person to forgive is yourself. And yeah, that's part. But the book don't talk about that part. It talks about you got to make things right with others. One time I took a class in tort law, and the whole process was to make the person whole. And that's what kind of how Doc taught me to do it. He said, you go and you look at only your part in it. That other person, that makes me different. He said, and you ask him, how can I make this right? And I'll tell you what, boy, walking up to some people, a lot of family too. The ones I thought would be the toughest, like my dad. And I hear a lot of people throughout the year that they think that's going to be the toughest. And I thought it was too. And I got to talking to him, and then I was like, my dad said, forget about it. He said, you're doing good now. I'm proud of you. He said, don't let that stuff bother your mind. And then other ones, I had to pray. I had to pray for the courage. I had to step through the shame. I had to step through the fear. I had to step through the guilt. Look people dead in the eye and say, this is what I did. How can I make it right? I'm sorry. And that was hard, but what it taught me was, 9 times out of 10 people say, especially people that knew me and they knew how bad I drank, they said, you're doing good. Thank you. I appreciate it. And that like changed my life. 4th and 5th saved my life. The 8th and 9th, it started cleaning up the dust around me. And that lady that I told you I scared to death in my drinking, I had to make amends to her. And we don't talk very much, but when we do, she's a good person and we get along, And she finally told me, she said, you just had this weird look in your eye. And I look back, what I did was I triggered her trauma. She grew up being abused by her grandfather. And I can see today where when I jumped in that window, how it must have triggered her and scared her. I do not blame her to this day for leaving the whole freaking town. So then things started to change for me, And I think back nowadays, I think back on my early sobriety and oh, shit, it was a fun adventure, you know? I wouldn't trade it for anything. You know, I struggle, but also Doc always made me a promise. That first part of the book, he said, this is a story of how what is it, hundreds of men and women have recovered from the disease of alcoholism. And he always said, when you start doing this work and that promise that, you know, you won't even think of it. For some reason, that was granted to me. But I don't know to this day why. I give credit to the work I did in the book, and always trying to maintain connection to my creator, you know. And it so then like early in my sobriety, I met another lady, and then we ended up together for 26 years, you know. Married 22 ago, and I ended up, you know, she brought a 4-year-old daughter into my life. And then in 2000, we had my baby, and we, yeah, I got no complaints about my sober life. It's awesome. I think zero complaints, you know. Sometimes, well, I I got to raise a family. Early in my sobriety, I got into boxing, you know. And I always look back, and I did pretty damn good in boxing. You know, I'm not one to brag, but I'm going to brag a little bit. I took the state novice golden glove. I took the state open golden glove, the regional open glove. I went to nationals, but I lost out to a kid from Detroit. It was just crazy fast. When I look back on that, now it's part of my recovery. And what it did was, you know, I talked about just being half to death sometimes. And it like brought something out of me. It brought back, you know. I finally realized that I wasn't this piece of crap that deserved to get beat up. I I was just drunk. I was an alcoholic. And I would black out every single time. And then on this side, every time I'd win, I'd be like, pretty fun. You know, it wasn't the pinnacle of my life, but it was pretty fun. And then finally, what I realized was that part of me kind of forgave that other part of me. I don't know if anybody that makes sense to anybody, yeah, but it did. And then it started. I became a family man. I started doing construction. And I also started working at Shoulder Children's Hospital. And Mick, my buddy Mick, he's the one that got me started there. And I was still drinking when I started there in '93. But I ended up working there for 5 years with kids full time, 2 years part time. Then my wife finally graduated from Carroll College and we moved back to Great Falls where she's from. She started getting benefits. We started having a life there, you know. And uh, my kids have never seen me drunk in my life. And I'm very proud of that. You know, they've seen dry drunkenness, but they have not seen me drunk. They have not seen the crazy maniac that I am. And when I'm drunk. And, you know, thinking back on my years of sobriety, I was there for my family. I never missed a birthday. I never missed a holiday with my family. I made, you know, the joys of my life with going to my children's events. Their basketball, their volleyball, their softball, their my oldest daughter's Irish dancing. Just everything, you know, I would take it back for anything. It finally worked out that in December 22 that my wife thought the grass was greener on the other side, you know. That destroyed me. And damn near destroyed me. I can honestly say that, you know. I adored that woman. But I also say wasn't always a bowl of cherries with her. You know, we had our ups and downs, we had our struggles. But that was the last 3 years have been a trip, crazy trip. I went to the divorce. I basically lost my family. My kids kind of sided with her. Great news that my baby had come back to me since. And it really put me really at no time, it maybe one time in all of that, I felt like drinking. You know, and I'd go past the Lucky Lills in Great Falls and Fifth Avenue South, and I'm like, you know, I could just pull over there, buy a bottle of Black Velvet, and just say fuck it. You know, but I knew exactly where I'd be. I knew exactly. I don't know, the men in here might relate, but I would be out at our house. I'd be kicking in the door. I'd be beating that guy within an inch of his leg. And I would probably end up in prison. For some reason, that thought came through my head. And I didn't drink, you know. I got into counseling. Me and my sponsor started doing every Friday for about 2 years. Never missed it. I started sweating. I've always sweated throughout my sobriety. But then about 5 years ago, I never missed a sweat. And then when this all started, we sweat every 2 weeks in Great Falls, and I never missed it. I could not miss it. I could not miss a meeting with my sponsor. And I got into therapy, you know, and in that therapy, I started to do EMDR. And I'll tell you what, that's been a game changer with me because I didn't have a secret one with my sponsor, Doc John. Um, and I went deep on a lot of things, you know, throughout the years. I had to deal with other stuff. You know, I had to deal with codependency, tons of grief, sex addiction. I had to deal with depression, you know, and with the EMDR, man, that brought me back to times when I was just a kid that I didn't even know still affected me. And I thank God for my therapist and it Falls Corinne. And I got through it. You know, I got through it and I'm still intact. And I look back at it now and it made me strong, you know. And then the last thing that Creator threw in was my heart valve went bad last year about this time. And I ended up in heart surgery here at Providence, you know. So I've been through a lot of things. That's when I got more time and I share my story in front of bigger crowds and stuff. I always let them know how sobriety was. You know, sobriety had to deal with my dad's death, my grandmother's death. These all weren't from drinking, thank God. And my grandpa's death, my mother-in-law's death, my father-in-law's death. Like I said, and the ones that all think got drug dealers close to death. And I sat there and watched my mother-in-law die, and I sat there and watched my grandma die. Watched her take that last breath. And I could not do that had I not been in this program, had I not believed in Creator, had I not cleaned up from the inside out. And that turned out to be a blessing. You know, I thank God that I could be there for them their last moment of life. And my kids, I wouldn't trade a day spent with them. You know, I love sobriety. Even every challenge that came in the last 29 years, as long as I was sober, I knew I was going to make it through it. As long as I was sober, I knew I was going to make it through it. And whenever sobriety has got tough in that 29 years, I have, and my ass started to fall off. When I was dry drunken, me and the ex were having marital problems, or somebody died. When my dad died, it took me about 4 years to recover from that. You know, I knew nothing about letting grief go. I had to get into counseling and learn about it. And I was in a major depression for a while. But every time, the answer to it all was get back to the basics in Alcoholics Anonymous. Tie in with my sponsor, start talking again, start writing again, start being honest again, and start working with people again, you know. And I'll tell you what, sponsorship for me sponsoring others has been a life changer. It's been a lifesaver. There's a lot of times in that divorce, I didn't think about drinking, but I thought about ending my life a lot. And I remember one day I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I've got my family and a wife and starting over at 52. And, you know, just leaving this old world kind of sounded like the solution. And then bam, my phone rang. And it was my sponsee, Joe, walking on the end of a cliff again. Joe, you're interrupting my depression. But I'll feel over in 5 minutes. They saved my life, you know, and I love them for it, each and every one of them, you know, and the sponsees I got now, I couldn't do it without them, you know. So yeah, the bride's been good to me, and if I don't drink between now and the 31st, I will have 30 years. You know, I'm very proud of that fact. And none of it's been easy, but all of it's been wonderful, and all of it's been a challenge, and all of it's been filled with tears, heartache, but also beautiful experiences, love, respect. And when my dad left this earth, he left it knowing that his baby boy was going to be okay. No worries, you know. My mother now, she's the same way. Yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Carol. Before closing, let us remember that anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions. On a personal level, tell anyone you wish that you are an AA member, but please do not reveal the identity of anyone else.